family. Yeah. First off, I want to give all praise and gratitude to Yahweh by Hashem, that was the true name of the living God of Israel. That was the true name of the one everyone ignorantly called Jesus. Jesus, the letter just created in 1524. So in the Bible, it's way older than 1524. So we know his name couldn't have been Jesus. And Rakak Dash is the proper way that you say Holy Spirit in the ancient language, which is the Paleo Hebrew. Second and foremost, I want to pay homage to all of the that came before me in previous lifetimes on your previous timeline. Your kings, prophets, priests, giving you the same knowledge, right? Because that's what game is, information and knowledge and wisdom, right? Giving it to you guys in previous lifetimes and on those timelines, just as I am doing for you today in your modern day lifetime on your modern day timeline. God pay homage to those men. Yeah, you feel me? Back in the portal. Today, you know, I'm gonna give a lesson and cultivate and review how my lesson come about. I had been cultivating since I did my previous Earth Angels. As you guys get, it's a great lesson. Yeah, but after I did that lesson, I had been cultivating this lesson, like through the spirit. So, the King and Malcolm X had been on my, you know, first when he got thrown, I didn't understand why. Then, you know, later down the line, I was like, oh, it's Black History Month. I'm like, spirit coming through. And I guess the spirit coming through because, you know, messages I have given. So at first, you know, but came was like, maybe I'm supposed to, you know, more. I thought that's just what it was. But it wasn't. And they're gonna be it, but and, so I was like, well, you know, as everything with the formulating about Malcolm and research that went coming through that I was doing, and previous research I already had did on these two great men, I was like, okay, God, I was like, I had a title, right? Title that, as you don't see it, the title for this lesson is perfection. It's not about perfection, it's about obedience. But my original title for this, as I was thinking about the Martin Luther King and the Malcolm X part of this lesson, I was gonna name it, it's not about perfection, it's about alignment, right? But when I had that title, I still wasn't prevailed, you know, to go ahead and give a lesson. So I'm like, man, God, what's up? Like, what am I missing? Like, what am I missing? Why you ain't provoking me to do this lesson? And I know usually when it's like that, I still have elements that he still want me to reach and get, right? And I ended up talking to a lady that I know, I think I mentioned her name before. Shout out to Kenya Richardson, right? Me and Kenya was talking and she gave me a story about her son-in-law and her daughter, right? And they don't live together, but they're still like married, right? So a son-in-law told her, like, cause he has a child for a lady in the previous relationship before he got with her, and he was like, he told her daughter, hey, why don't we all just come together in one house, right? And that'll make things a whole lot easier, you know, for us, you know. And I was like, damn, I was like, you know, I say, I ain't gonna lie to you, that was, you know, smart thinking. So she rebutted, you know, and she was like, well, you know, she ain't gonna do that. I say, well, I ain't saying that, you know, that she is or not. I'm just saying that it's smart thinking is bad. I say, but you still have to have wisdom. Like, if you gonna think like that, you still gotta move with wisdom. You feel me? And I listened to it. I was like, hey man, I say, look, you a feminist. So she was like, nah, I'm not no feminist. I'm not a feminist. I was like, yeah, you a feminist, man. I was like, I fuck with you. I understand why. I say, I get it. I say, but you know, at heart, you feel me? I say, and I got out the phone with her and I said back, right? And like the lesson, so God went to talk and he was like, "Why are you single?" Because if you answer why you're single, then you can answer, you know, why you prefer him to use wisdom but jumping into that situation. And I was like, man, you know, I'm like, shit. I had to think about it, right? I had to really think about it. And as I thought about it, I was like, man, I don't want to be responsible for her. I don't want to be responsible for her. But that wasn't enough. You know what I'm saying? I felt in my spirit, God was like, okay, what else? And I was like, well, I got asked why I don't want to be responsible. It was like, wait, why don't I want to be responsible for a woman? So I'm going, digging in my right, going back in previous relationships. I'm like, the time that, you know, I was, you know, in a relationship with a woman, and I felt like I automatically felt I was responsible. And I'm like, that came with weight. It came with pressure. I was cool. I was under the pressure of the responsibility. It was the fact that I've been responsible for someone who didn't understand that I was responsible for them. I'm ready to do the lesson. And I was like, hold up, I'm not done. I'm like, you got to clue me in. Like, what's going on? He was like, you just said it. He was like, see how you feel? I feel the same way about the men of Israel. Right? He was like, you don't want to be responsible for a woman that you don't feel belong to you. That is your property. I was like, yeah. I was like, basically. He was like, yeah. He was like, I feel the same way. You're like, because if I do otherwise, if I do look out for the children of Israel, if I do look out for the men of the children of Israel, guess what I'll be doing? And I had to look at myself and reflect. I said, you'll be simping, Lord. He said, right. He said, and I don't like to simp. And I can agree. You feel me? And that's what we're going to get into today. But I do got to start off with the two great brothers, since it is Black History Month, right? Fuck Valentine's Day. And really fuck Black History Month too, because as African Americans, as AKA the Negroes in America, right? Because that even that term African American is being hijacked. But you can't hijack the soul. Shout out to Kendrick Barrett. You can't hijack the soul of being a Negro. Right? So I'm gonna stay with that title right there, even though we are Israelites, right? But for you guys' sakes out there, and for my people out there, and on the sake of the great brother Malcolm X, and on the sake of the great brother Martin Luther King Jr., right? I'm a label us who they were referring to, the Negroes in America, right? Malcolm X, right? We're gonna start with the brother Malcolm, right? Malcolm X, right? And the brother Martin Luther King Jr., very two powerful Negroes in America, right? During that time frame. Okay? But the same problems that we are having today, they were also experiencing, right? And it was really dealing with the black man, the relationship, when it all boiled down, it was all dealing with the relationship between the black man, or let me say it right, the Negro man and the Negro woman, right? And these two men had two different perspectives on what they thought would help us out, right? Malcolm X, you know, he thought that if the Negro, right, would develop himself more disciplined and be more disciplined and have and establish more discipline in his life and have more morale about himself, right? It will fix the problem, right? The brother Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., right? He thought his thought process was if the Negro be able to gain some type of economic stability in America, right, then that will fix the problem. And as the future of those two great men, and as I look back, I'm not going to say that they were wrong, but I'm going to say that they both were short-sighted, right? And the brother Malcolm X, for all you guys that don't know, the brother Malcolm X, he practiced semen retention for 12 years before he met his wife Betty, right? Martin Luther King Jr., on the other hand, total opposite, okay? We know about his wife, but Martin Luther King Jr. lived a totally different life, and that's because of fame, right? When fame come and power come, women come, right? But the brother Malcolm, even though he was getting fame and he was getting power, he still was obedient, right? But what the brother Malcolm later came to realize was he was being more obedient than those who were around him in the organization that he was a part of. See, they was riding off of his name. They was getting pussy off of his name, right? They didn't believe in what he believed in, right? And the brother, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., later down the line came to the same realization about the individuals that were hanging around him, right? But these two great men grew up in a time frame in America where it was nothing for a Negro to be lynched inside of the United States of America, especially in the Deep South. Okay, it was so horrific and so terrible that the beautiful songstress Miss Billie Holiday in that time created a song called Strange Fruit. Because every time she did a tour to come down south, it was not one time that she didn't see a Negro body hanging in a tree. May peace and blessings be upon her life. Who also is a part of quote unquote Black history. But the brother, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., he sold us out. And all of my people out there that are civil rights activists and all of that, you gonna hate me for what I'm about to say, but oh well, fuck you, because the truth is the truth. Martin Luther King Jr., what he came to realize was his whole mission had been infiltrated, because once again his mission was the economic stability of the Negro in America. But somewhere down the line, and because of the men that was around him that was benefiting off the fame of his name and that was getting buku pussy off of the fame of his name, right? He went to ass kissing. Now, when you understand why he was ass kissing, you have to understand history and what was going on in the 60s, right? A lot of people like to stress about the 70s, but the 60s, if it wasn't for the 60s, you wouldn't have the golden age of the 70s when it came to music and the expressions that was going on, even feminism, right? And that's part of this lesson. Or the sexual revolution, right? If it wasn't for the 60s, okay? The Negro in America was trying to establish a new identity for themselves during the 60s, right? That's why the 60s was so pivotal. But Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. knew not only was the Negro trying to establish a new identity for themselves, but the United States of America as a whole was trying to establish a new identity for itself. Because the Vietnam War had really popped off, and you had so many young men that was getting drafted. So the United States of America was taking on a new identity. John F. Kennedy was about to do something in the 60s. He was about to kill and I could probably lose my life for saying this, but fuck it, it is what it is. John F. Kennedy was going to kill the international foreign entities that run the banking corporation in America. He was going to kill it. And by him killing it, the United States of America was going to be able to print their own money again, besides the Federal Reserve, which is a foreign entity having control over the United States corporation, right? Martin Luther King knew that. So what Martin Luther King was trying to do with his ass kissing, which he did do, and it benefited it, because it got him to the White House, right? With the civil rights movement, it got him to the White House, but it was infiltrated, because what he didn't see in the forthcoming future was the J-ish people that run America, not the Caucasians, but the Caucasian J-ish people, not the Caucasian Americans, because they're in slavery to the J-ish Caucasians. What Martin Luther King Jr. didn't realize or didn't know was they was about to get rid of John F. Kennedy in Dallas, Texas, which is crazy that I'm currently in Dallas, Texas, giving this lesson. Yeah, they was about to get rid of him, right? Because who the fuck are you to think that you're gonna kill the corporation that we fought really hard to get back in through Roosevelt, right? With the Great Depression. Because if you know American history, and I'm not a fan of Andrew Jackson, but one thing Andrew Jackson did do, he killed the bakers. He killed them. He killed them. But they slid back in like the snakes that they are. But Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., once he realized that, I've led my people into a burning house, he tried to rebrand his mission with the Poor People's Campaign. But by this time, the J-ish people had caught on because of the niggas that was around him, because they was still getting pussy off of Martin Luther King Jr. name, and they was getting pussy off of the quote-unquote civil rights movement, right? They ran back to the J-ish bankers and sold them out. And just like the fate of the great, one of the greatest presidents of the United States of America, John F. Kennedy, he ended up meeting his fate. Malcolm X, on the other hand, his story was synonymous, right? The Nation of Islam, right? Malcolm went to attacking John F. Kennedy. And what happened was, as he attacked him publicly, right? Because Malcolm was smart. He was on semen retention. He's seeing what John F. Kennedy is doing, but he's also have the intuition to know this shit ain't right, Martin. You ass kissing. Why you can't get what the fuck you want without doing some ass kissing with I Have a Dream? Why you can't stand on your discipline and in your power as a man to demand what you want? But those that was around the great brother Malcolm X, right? By them wasn't as disciplined and as in order, but like the great brother Malcolm X, right? And they was victims of their sexual lust. What the great brother Malcolm X later came to find out, that he was more disciplined when it came down to his sexual discipline than his own leader, Prophet Elijah Muhammad. Those that were around the great brother Malcolm X, that was benefiting off of his name and getting pussy off of his name, when Malcolm came to the realization and was like, let me separate myself, which we all do when we're on semen retention. At first what they did, they sent Betty. And I'm not saying that Malcolm didn't love Betty. But one thing about a woman, she can mirror you, right? This is why it's important on semen retention for you to be in tune. See, if Malcolm would have stayed on his pivot, right? But he was pushed into that marriage with Betty. Because what Prophet Elijah Muhammad and those niggas that was around Brother Malcolm at that time, what they knew was, you getting too powerful. You getting too strong. We got to calm that fire down. And there's only one way you calm the fire down in a man. You get him some pussy, right? You do the same thing that the Philistines did with Samson. You get him some pussy, right? You calm that fire down. If the great brother Malcolm X and the great brother Martin Luther King Jr., right? And one thing I got to say about Malcolm X, J. Edgar Hoover, who was one of the main agents that the Matrix used to attack these two brothers, who was a cross-dresser, right? Who was very effeminate, right? One thing he did have to admit about the great brother Malcolm X, he said Malcolm was one of the most disciplined individuals that he ever had a pleasure of watching. Martin Luther King Jr., not so much, right? But Malcolm was one of the most disciplined. When it came, they set up cameras and microphones in both of these men's rooms, right? Martin, you might bound to hear orgy going on in that bitch, which I'm not mad with Martin. It come with the territory. They were celebrities in that time, right? But Malcolm, only thing you gonna hear is prayer. That's it, prayer. I believe that, and I think that's what Martin learned from Malcolm later down the line, right? Discipline over his sexual nature. But by that time, you know, hate is a real thing. And I think if Martin would have been more disciplined during the poor, if he would have understood how important the Poor People's Campaign really was going to be, because you hearing a different Martin Luther King Jr. during the Poor People's Campaign than you're hearing from I Have a Dream, right? Two total different men. One man is practicing semen retention. The other man really wasn't. He was partying and benefiting off of his movement, right? Same with Malcolm. In the beginning, when Malcolm was practicing semen retention, fire. Nothing but fire coming out. But after he got denounced out of the Nation of Islam, he had more time to be around Betty and his family. His speech was docile. Still important, but docile. It didn't have that fire to it anymore. Most people would say he was at peace. I beg to differ. If you really study Malcolm X, Malcolm never wanted to be, he understood being denounced from the Nation of Islam, it kind of took his purpose away. But it also made him have to go inside of himself, which was a great thing. So if that is being in peace, okay, we're going to call it that then. But I'm a truth seeker. I'm not going to overlook, I'm not biased. I'm not going to overlook he did have a different tone in speaking, right? And same with the brother Martin. But I think Martin, if he would have just stayed on semen retention longer, because, you know, it happens. It happens, man. He probably would still been here. If Malcolm X would have stayed on semen retention longer, he probably would still been here. When you get off of SR, man, you lose that hedge of protection, especially when you a leader, right? Just like these two men were, right? But I had to get that out the way so I can get into the meat of the lesson, which is about their whole purpose. Both of these men' purpose was to try to bring peace in the Negro household, right? That was the whole thing. But God showed me something. He said, look, both of them wasn't perfect. Both of them wasn't perfect. But one thing you got to respect about both of them at different times and different points of their life was when they administered order. And God was like, that's what y'all missing. That's what the Negro was missing in that time, order. But the reason why Malcolm was wrong and the reason why Martin Luther King was wrong on what would bring that order to the family household, and I had to ask God, I say, God, why? I say, they were great points. He said, yeah, they were great points. He said, but it was missing something. And I say, what was it missing, Lord? He said, it was missing me. Malcolm was calling on Allah. That's not my name. Y'all not Muslims. Y'all the children of Israel. Martin Luther King Jr., the white man, after he infiltrated the civil rights movement, declared him as a reverend. But there's not one scripture you ever gonna hear from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. They was missing me. And that's what you guys always have missed. And in that time frame, what you don't know, what your generation don't know is they was getting that ass whooping because of, in lifetimes before that, right, you guys went off. Right? You guys went off. So the lynchings that was taking place, the white man beating y'all all in y'all head, spitting on y'all, right? Dragging y'all out y'all house, right? Even after slavery, right? What we would call the Jim Crow era. That was my doing. I turned my face from y'all, right? And the reason why I turned my face from y'all, and the reason why right now in your time, and even in Martin Luther King Jr. and in Malcolm X time, right? The reason why the black man or the Negro man and the Negro woman can't see eye to eye is because the Negro man turned his face from me. You know, we're going to get into it today. It's not about perfection. It's about order. And I got the chat with me. Shout out to the chat. You understand me? And we're going to get into it. In today's world, many women born from 1960 onward operate under the rebellious framework of modern feminism. They often reject the ideal of being a possession, right? Or under the responsibility of a man. On the surface, this seems like empowerment, but the deeper root lies in the condition of men themselves. Men stop seeing themselves as property of Yahweh Bahashem Yahweh Shai. When a man no longer sees himself accountable to the Most High, he loses the sense of responsibility and stewardship that naturally extends to his family. And when men neglect their authority and order, women respond by asserting independence, often in ways that disrupt the divine order Yahweh intended. The problem simply leads to rebellion, right? Scripture makes it clear when men fail in their stewardship, women often rebel. In Ezekiel 16, Yahweh turns his face from the men of Israel because they forgot their accountability and failed to uphold the covenant. So what we're doing right now, right? Because most men going MGTOW. I'm talking to the Negro household today. Passport Bros, MGTOW, shout out semen retention, right? Most men are following these paths right now. Most Negro men are following these paths. Why? Well, the core reason is the Negro man and really the man in America, but since I'm dealing with the Negro man, right? Tired of simping. Tired of simping, right? But what we fail to realize is God got tired of simping with us, right? So we doing just like God did with us. We turning our face, right? We turning our face on our woman because the men of Israel collectively God see as a woman. He see the nation of Israel as a woman and the nation make up as the men, right?